Welcome to those of you who've joined us for the final session of World Endangered Writing Day. And I have to say, it's been an incredible day. And in some respects, it just gets more incredible with each passing session. And I should be exhausted at this point, having been on the screen since when it was dark this morning, and now it's dark this evening. But we've had so many interesting people, so many interesting questions, conversations, discussions, and I can't imagine anybody I would rather sort of wrap it all up with than my guest, Amalia Gnanadesikan. So when I first started working on the Endangered Alphabets Project around 2010, I assumed that there would be tons of stuff out there that scholars who actually knew what they were talking about had written. There were books that I could research. This is how I normally go about my business. But in fact, there weren't. There were really only 2 books that I read that were of any value back then at all, and that were actually inspiring. One of them was David Crystal's Cambridge Encyclopedia of Language, not least because he wasn't like any encyclopedia I'd ever seen before. He was just doing really creative and unusual things with the page and making it very sort of graphic and often very funny. And the other was Amalia's book, The Writing Revolution from, is it Cuneiform or Cuneiform to the internet? One of the two. And that really gave writing a historical sweep as an invention, as a cultural artifact, as a graphic representation. So I am so delighted that you're here with us, Amalia. Come and say hello.
It's good to be here, Tim. Thank you so much for having me, putting on this wonderful day. And also thanks to those who are behind the scenes, like Oscar, who are making all of this possible.
Yes, Oscar and Alec between them, and also Drea, who did tons of work in terms of composing all of the slides, updating the Atlas of Endangered Alphabets. Just amazing. Anyhow, so what I'd like, I want you and I to have various bites at a subject that is far too big for us to cover, which is you have this absolutely wonderful historical vision of writing sort of from then to now and into the future. And what I want to do is to talk about ways in which writing has changed as an act, not as a commodity, but as a human event. And talk a little bit about some of the major forces that have led those changes. And then we'll get to, like, where is it going? Why not? Why not?
Yes, and if Oscar does find the slides, maybe we'll have some pictures to show, but if not, that's fine. Because one of the things that has changed, and I think will continue to change about writing, is what it looks like and it feels like. If you look at some of the oldest versions of writing, you had writing that was impressed onto clay tablets. And the wonderful thing about clay tablets is that if your house burns down, your library will survive. And that is not something that we can say today, but that goes with a different look and feel. Writing at that time was 3-dimensional in that those marks were impressed into the clay. Nowadays, mostly we see writing as a 2-dimensional thing, and maybe we do it on paper. Do not put the paper in the oven to fire it like you might with your clay tablet, because that's not going to turn out very well. But we're actually moving into another kind of storage, where we store it, going from the clay tablet to the piece of paper. Now it's stored inside a digital device. And so for the first time in history, the storage of writing doesn't look like the display of writing. You know the joke about if a tree falls in the forest and nobody's there to hear it? Well, if your book is closed, your book with paper pages is closed, does it have your story in it? Well, yeah, right, it does. But what's inside your computer is on your flash drive maybe is not what you see. And that is something that is a fundamental change that has happened in very recent years. And I think if we look to the future, we may see further differences in how writing is stored and the difference between storage and display. I wouldn't be surprised if sometime in the future we may, in fact, all have neural implants and we will see writing inside our own heads.
And in some respects, some of the most interesting developments in writing in a very broad sense are heads-up displays, which you actually see
That's
not inside your own head, but certainly on a screen. So for those who don't know, let's say, for example, you're a helicopter pilot and you are making an attack run at, say, 60 feet above tree level, then you need to get information in a way that is not only clear and quick, but it doesn't distract you in such a fashion that you then actually hit the trees. And
That's right.
so there's really interesting research being done into how is it that we best take in urgent information, for example. What is the use of color? What is the use of movement? And I suspect that personally, I don't like the idea of cranial implants, but if we at least go to heads-up displays, then those are the people, I'm sure, who are doing really interesting research, especially as it probably has a heck of a more funding than the Endangered Alphabets Project does.
Indeed, and I'm not looking forward to the implant either. But just thinking of where are we heading with this? What is and indeed, what you say with the heads-up display, a transparent display
Exactly.
is we go from thick tablets to very thin paper to now transparent displays, and that's something we can sort of chart a development over time.
The other thing about heads-up displays is that they're one way. So you don't stop and take out a marker and start writing on the inside of your visor, or that may actually defeat the purpose, and you may then hit the tree once again. So I think another thing that's happening with writing is that the relationship between writer and reader has become a great deal more complex. So I'm really struck by, for example, we saw Ken Burns' series on the Civil War. We've seen UK series on, for example, the Great War, where people read aloud the letters that were written home from people who are at the front, or people at home writing letters to, somebody who's in the trenches. That's an extraordinarily powerful and intimate purpose and an emotional exchange. And I'm wondering whether that sense of writing as an intimate exchange, as a gift even, is something that's also changing.
Yeah, so I think it's changing in sort of both directions at once. And one is that writing has become tremendously democratized.
Yes.
With the advent of the cell phone, the smartphone. And so it was said in the times in the 20th century that we were potentially seeing the death of written language because we had radio and then television and these technologies that allowed the transmission of the spoken word. But in fact, then we got cell phones, and it turns out people would rather write to each other than
Yes.
call each other.
Yes.
And so we're constantly exchanging thoughts with those who are near us, thoughts, Wordle scores, whatever it might be,
Right.
with the people that we feel close to. And so that's that was not really possible in former days. So that's a way I think we're getting more intimate with our writing. But there's another sense in which we are becoming far more distanced from our writing. And that is that we used to write by creation. Every character that was written by somebody's hand.
Yep.
It was a personal act of creation. And as you said about your mother's handwriting, you can recognize people's handwriting. Then we moved on to writing by selection. Now almost all writing is done by selection. And so we select the character from the keyboard, or we select it with our thumbs or our fingers. And so we are not making those letters anymore, the individual characters. But until rather recently, we were still composing the individual words. We were not making the characters, but we were composing the words. Then, as you and Gabriel were just saying in the last session, now we have systems that we can be selecting whole words or sentences or paragraphs. And so in that sense, yes, we are becoming more and more distanced from our own writing. It is no longer an act of our physical body in the same way, and it may eventually not even be an act of our own composition in quite the same way. I mean, we're facing that now. So in that sense, we're becoming more distanced, and in another way, we're becoming more intimate with our writing. So like so many things in historical developments, there are trade-offs.
Yes, and what you say reminds me, and you know this story because you are kind enough to do a very, very effective and helpful read of Writing Beyond Writing when it was in manuscript still. Reminds you of the story of this email I got from a young woman in Indonesia, in Java, in fact, and I had put out the word to the internet in general saying, tell me what is happening in terms of reviving traditional scripts. And so the first part of her email was to say what is happening in the province of Java in terms of reviving the use of traditional Javanese script. But then she went on to say that she had recently found a bundle of letters from, I think it was her grandfather. And he had been a soldier in the Indonesian War of Independence after World War II, when it became an independent nation from the Dutch. And she was really dying to know what that experience was like, to be somebody at that point in history, in that struggle. And the problem was she couldn't read his letters because they were written in traditional Javanese script, which she could no longer read. And it occurred to me that something that Jerry Leonidas at the University of Reading said to me when I interviewed him a year ago, that in the West, we are very much focused on severing our connections from the past and believing in invention and technology as a way forward, but that tended to mean that we sever that connection with the past. And what was happening with this young woman was that she was actually looking for learning and technology as a way of connecting with her past and kind of healing that rift between not only her personal past, but her cultural past.
Yes. Well, writing is writing again is something that it moves in two directions simultaneously here, because writing is an invention. All writing is an invention. Even those that we say they evolved organically, yes, they did, but somebody along the way said, wouldn't it be a good idea if we drew this symbol and it meant this? So all writing is an invention, but all writing is also inherently historical, because the minute you've written it down, it is now belongs to the past. So even if it travels to your friend at the speed of light, some time has gone by before anybody else will see that before it is read. So all writing is historical. And as a result, writing tends to be a very conservative force in a culture. And I mean, all those silent letters in English, that is the history of our language encoded in our writing system. So the silent K in a word like night or knee, knife, that is a little piece of the history of the English language that comes down to us in our written language. So writing is both inherently technological and invention, and it is inherently historical. So it's one of the things I love about it, in fact, that it really exemplifies the human mind. We have history. Other animals don't tell each other stories. We do. Culture, a transmissible culture, is part of what it is to be human. But we also go around inventing new technologies. So writing really is a great example of what the human mind can do. And anyone who dismisses it is really missing something.
So this is, again, this is fascinating because as you were talking about that, I was thinking of the phrase that I used just recently. Writing enables us to make visible the conceptions of the human mind. And as you know, I have this this section in my book where I was looking at the pencil, and as I was sketching what I was going to carve next, and thinking about the fact that the pencil is a wonderful thing because it makes visible the conceptions of the human mind, but it also makes them erasable, really easily erasable. And that's the way that thinking works. We like to believe that we're logical creatures, and one thing leads to another. But in practice, we constantly have this ferment of ideas, which we instantly tailor or forget or obliterate or improve on. And so the pencil, and in that sketching fashion, is exactly the way that our thinking works. So the pencil, in my mind, is one of the few tools that actually makes us smarter, because it actually forces us to improve on what it is that we've just done. That notion of doing it better is built into the usage of the pencil. So I'm voting for the pencil as the most valuable piece of technology invented in the last 1,000 years.
Yes, well, and in fact, the story of the secondary technologies of writing. If you take writing itself as the primary technology, then
Okay.
there are secondary technologies. And the history of those is also fascinating. And there is an interplay between the history of writing and the history of those secondary technologies. And in fact, there's some interesting lessons in there, actually, because not all writing systems are adapted to any given secondary technology.
Correct.
Because
Yeah.
people inventing this, you mentioned about the fountain pen that doesn't make upward strokes. Well, it wasn't invented by somebody trying to make upward strokes.
Exactly.
And so it doesn't make a script that has upward strokes bad. But if all you have is a fountain pen, you might be tempted to think that.
Exactly.
And one of the real lessons in the last 100, 150 years is the ethnocentric self-congratulation surrounding the typewriter. The typewriter is another secondary technology, and it was made for a certain kind of script that proceeds across the page in only one direction at a time, in sort of chunks that you could more or less say were the same size. I mean, they really weren't, but you could kind of make them the same size. So it did a kind of ugly job, in fact, on any writing system, but you could make it work for a script like the Roman alphabet. But that meant that scripts that were not well adapted to a typewriter were looked down on.
Right, Abagidas in particular.
There is a very important lesson here. Korean Hangul is an excellent example because it was an endangered. The Korean script that is now used, totally mainstream, was an endangered script for hundreds of years. But then, just at the end of the 19th century, it was adopted as the official Korean script. But then they realized, oh, we can't use a typewriter. So there were recommendations to linearize it, to change the way it was written so that you could write it more easily with a typewriter, because those advanced alphabets, those Western advanced ones, were written that way. But in fact, the flaw was in the typewriter, was in the technology. And at this point, what is dead? Hangul or the typewriter? It's actually the typewriter.
Yeah.
And Hangul is doing just fine. And also, there's an increasing amount of evidence that scripts like Hangul, which combine their vowels and their consonants together into syllable or syllable-like structures, are easier for children to learn. So Korean children learn to read much more easily than, say, American children. And this was something that, because of the secondary technology, was thought to be worse. We should get rid of it, and so forth. And the answer to that, and it will continue to be, is update your technology, not the script.
So I must give a plug here to Radiolab. There is a fantastic Radiolab episode called The Wubby Effect, which is all about the back and forth indecision and angst in China as to whether to drop the wonderful, just beautiful traditional Chinese script in favor of something alphabetic for technical purposes, just so it could be written more quickly. And the story just gets more and more interesting. It goes on. So Radiolab podcast, The Wubby Effect, highly recommended. So Amalia, I'm going to ask you a question that nobody should ever ask a writer, which is, how is the second edition of your book going to be different from the first edition? Because I know you're working on the second edition, and probably you're tearing hair out doing it.
No, actually, in some ways, writing a second edition is much easier than writing a first, because there's nothing I find more challenging than the blank page. And so if you've got something to start with, that really helps. But how is it different? Well, one important change is that a lot has happened in the last 15 years.
Yeah.
In terms of the digital technologies. So there's going to be a whole new chapter on digital writing. And I'm also going to include a few written traditions that I didn't include before, one of which is going to serve as a historical backdrop for digital writing, which is Braille. because Braille is actually an early digitization of writing. It's not analog shapes, it's individual points that are either on or off. And that's what digitization is. So I'm going to cover Braille as well, also a little bit on Canadian Aboriginal syllabics, family of scripts, and a few other updates throughout. But the main thing is that there'll be an extra chapter.
So I sound like a pitch man here because I'm actually now going to do another shout out. So one of the members of the extended Endangered Alphabets family, Harris Mowbray, has a very young guy. He's the future of the world. He spends his spare time creating Braille editions of minority and indigenous scripts. And if there was ever a kind of a wonderful work piled on top of a wonderful work, that's it. So we're going to have a recorded conversation between Harris and myself available sometime soon on the Endangered Alphabets YouTube channel. And anybody who's watching this should wait a few days and then go and check that out. Go ahead.
That's great that you're doing that, because Braille is a really often overlooked aspect of writing. There's a lot of talk about writing being language made visible or thoughts made visible. And yes, those of us who are sighted can see Braille and you can read it that way, but that is not what it is designed for. The crucial thing about writing is that it is spatial, not that it is visible. And Braille is the great way of demonstrating that. And so so not only is it the first digitization of writing, but it is also a different modality of writing.
And that really ties in with what Sabine was talking about in terms of people, quote, reading, unquote, Kipu by touch. And there being 3 different degrees of roughness. I mean, this is in many ways a wonderful time to be interested in writing, because there was so little done, and it was so limited and so colonial and so elitist for so long, that to dive in right now and to start thinking about writing in a much more open-minded and exploratory way, it's a great time to be alive.
It is. And our hemisphere is a great example to the rest of the world that writing is not always what we expect it is. The Maya script, that was not writing. That was just an advanced calendrical system. Well, then it turned out it was writing. And the Aztec system, that was just pictographic. That was an advanced rebus system. It wasn't really writing. Well, it turns out it's writing. And so, and now with the work on Kipu, I think it's fascinating. I'm staying tuned definitely for some definite results there. Sabine has some wonderful suggestive work that shows that Kipu may well have had linguistic interpretation, but I think we're living in, like you say, very exciting times.
So I'm going to wrap up here for possibly the strangest reason ever to wrap up a talk, which is that it's now dark and there are going to be deer appearing in our backyard shortly. And the dog is on the couch, but as soon as he senses a deer, and gosh knows how he does it because he can do it when he's in a different room, he is going to bark so loudly he's going to deafen everybody, and I'm going to have to rush and let him out. So before that happens, thank you so much, Amalia, for joining me for this sort of wrap-up plenary, look back, look forward. I'm delighted that you're now on the board of the Endangered Alphabets Project, and I look forward to the second edition of your book.
And I look forward to the next year of World Endangered Writing Day.
Brilliant. All right. So I need to do sort of a wrap up of the day here. And I have a series of slides so I don't forget any of these important things that I want to say. So first of all, yes, thanks to our sponsors, Bureau Works. I'm not sure if it's Kamaka or Kamaka, Lexigo and Phrase. We would not be here without you, or alternatively, I would be paying Alec and Drea and Oscar out of my own pocket, which is empty. We also have these wonderful partners who agreed to publicize the World Endangered Writing Day, and they did a great job of getting the word out over social media. So thanks to everybody there. Yes, so these are our speakers, but also people who are responsible for putting us in touch with our speakers or getting our speakers on board, or in the case of Michael Reed, our other interviewer. Thank you all so much. And I'm sorry we don't have the names of all of the sign and symbol group from Warsaw included here. We didn't know who you were until the last minute because Olesh was keeping you a secret. Also, this has been an initiative of the Endangered Alphabets Project. So our global designer, Drea Sullivan, did immense work in terms of developing slides, in terms of updating the Atlas of Endangered Alphabets. Fantastic stuff. Patricia Julian composed our theme music a couple of years ago. It hasn't aged a day. Senior executive line producer, Alec Julian, who has been trying to make sense of my video productions now ever since COVID, and has grown old in the process. Our video producer, who has not grown old at all. In fact, he seems to be getting younger by the day. Oscar, thank you so much for all of the hard work. Oscar was working on this until 2 o'clock in the morning and then was up again at daybreak. And the last guy you don't need to know about. Next slide, please. Here we go. Yes, please consider supporting our work. This is, as we've said, this is a cutting edge development, endangered scripts, and there is virtually no institutional funding for it whatsoever. So we really depend heavily on individual donations, and if you can find it to do so, that would be wonderful. If you work for Google, then they may match your donation. So with luck, and with a lot of hard work, we will see you again next year at World Endangered Writing Day 2025. Thank you and good night.